Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Jeremy Schumacher. I am a licensed marriage family therapist. I'm the Jer in Wellness with Jer. Thanks for checking out my channel today. Today, we're doing something a little different. I'm in a new space and I'm recording differently, and it's distracting. And as someone who has ADHD, a new setup and trying to trial run some stuff while recording something is maybe not the best way to do it, but I can't convince my brain to do something different. So we're going to try and do a review of the BBC One slash Netflix show Inside Man, starring Stanley Tucci and David Tennant from Stephen Moffat. Stephen Moffat did like Sherlock and a bunch of stuff. He's got a good reputation in the business. I guess I have no idea what his reputation in the business is. I'm not an important person like that. But yeah, it was broadcast on BBC One, so British television show first, and then Netflix released it. I watched it a couple weeks ago and wasn't super planning on doing a review of it. So this is a little bit of like, I haven't done a video in a minute, and I'm trying to record in my new space. So I moved offices. That's the new space. My office I sublease from a graphics printing company, hence the frog on the door behind me, which looks great, I think. I might be super washed out, though. I can't tell how bright it is in here. So all of that aside, Inside Man was filmed, came out in 2022, 4 episodes, it's about 4 hours long. I watched it in a sitting, which is kind of rare for me, just in the sense that I have 2 little kids, so I don't always have a ton of time to watch stuff. So I think that's part of the reason I breezed through it, was because it's like I wanted to finish it and wasn't like guaranteed to get more time to watch it. And my wife came down after episode 1, and I just kind of filled her in on what had happened, and she watched the rest of it. She doesn't like scary or tense stuff as much. So, but yeah, we went through it. I'm just pulling up the cast list here so I can get everybody. David Tennant. David Tennant is Doctor Who. For people who are Doctor Who fans, I love David Tennant ever since his turn in Broadchurch, which is a show I should also do a review of at some point. He was also in the Netflix version of the Marvel Jessica Jones. So he's a very, very talented actor and is phenomenal in this show. No surprise, I think, to anyone who's familiar with his work. Stanley Tucci is in it as well. He's playing a convicted death row inmate. He is on death row for killing his wife. And like, he's kind of a, let's see, let's pull this up here. Jefferson Grief is his character name. Jefferson is like criminologist. He was like a professor of law, and he kills his wife in like kind of horrific fashion. It's not shown in the show. It's alluded to throughout the course of the show, and it's kind of one of the ongoing mysteries of like what happened to this guy that he's on death row. But people come to him while he's on death row to solve their like cold cases or their murder mysteries. He's like Sherlock Holmes if Sherlock Holmes was on death row. Sorry, I keep feeling like I'm dropping my eyes to check on the recording because now I can see it, which is the thing I never did when I was recording the other way. So that's distracting. And David Tennant is playing a vicar. Let's see, Harry. And Harry is married to, Mary. Harry and Mary. Rhyming names are fun. I've had a couple rhyming clients. I've had a couple clients who have similar names, and it's just like the female version of the male name. So like Sean and Shauna, not their real names. I'm changing it, but like that's fun. Good for those people who power through. I think if you're like married or you're a couple and you have rhyming, people are always going to do that, right? So Mary and Harry are married. Harry's a vicar. I was not raised Catholic, so don't quote me on this. I don't know if he converts to like vicarness later in life. It's implied. So he wasn't like a priest growing up. Priests can't get married. He didn't start that way. So I think that's the vicar. That's the only thing that's ever really explained into it. And then let's see. I have the cast list up here. Give me a second. Stephen Moffat's son, Lewis Oliver. Lewis Oliver plays their son Ben. And Dolly Wells plays Janice Fife, who's their mathematics tutor. So like the story, so we have Jefferson, serial killer in prison, not serial killer, convicted killer in prison on death row, as like he's a captivating character for sure. As someone like me who grew up really liking like psychological stuff, I was super into serial killers when I was growing up. So like kind of that vibe. I think like the mystery surrounding him, he's the interesting character. Like the know-it-all who will like take 2 or 3 clues and like make this fantastical leap and explain how the crime was done. So it's like that type of character. But the actual story of the show kind of takes place outside of the prison. And we have Dolly, we have Janice, played by Dolly Wells, the tutor for the vicar's son. And so the vicar's at church. He like gives a sermon, and one of his parishioners comes in to him after the service and is like, "You got to help me. You got to help me." And they have a previous relationship implied. And the vicar's like, "What do you need?" And he's like, "You have to take my porn." And so like hands him this memory stick, like a USB memory stick. And he's like, "You got to take it. My mom's going to find it. I'm going to get in trouble." And so the vicar takes the memory stick and hides it and says like, no, the kid's good. And then the vicar leaves, and we see like the mom then abusing the son. So it's like a very unpleasant and the kind of sad scene. But the story all kind of kicks off around this memory stick. The vicar, without thinking about it, goes home, takes Kia's pocket memory sticks in there, throws them on the counter. No biggie. Later, the math tutor is in the house trying to tutor the son, can't get the computer to work. The son grabs the memory stick, hands it to the tutor. The tutor plugs it in. And then on the memory stick, the pornography is child porn. And so she's like horrified at what she sees on the computer screen. The kid, the vicar's son, has no idea what's on the memory stick because it's not his memory stick. He's never looked at it, but he knows he thinks it's his dad's. So he's like, "Oh, that's mine," because he doesn't want his dad to get in trouble. The vicar doesn't know what's on it because he never looked at it. So he's like, "That's not my son's, that's mine," when the tutor confronts him and says what's on it. And she like wants to report it, right? She wants to go to the cops, like, child porn, let's report that, which is what you would need to do. It's child abuse. So she's going to go report it. The vicar doesn't want her to because he wants to protect his son. So he says it's his, trying to be protective of his son, but also protecting his kid's his parishioner's confidentiality. And the kid like has no idea what's on it, so doesn't even know that it's a thing. The vicar lets his son skip tutoring and go off to like a concert, and then the story kicks off. So like the tutor tries to leave, the vicar's trying to stop her from leaving. He like shoves her, she falls, stumbles, hits her head on like the kitchen counter, and like breaks her phone. And in this time, I skipped a step. I'm giving you like a brief plot summary so I can talk about the mental health stuff. In this time, she sends one text message. It happens to be a crime reporter that she met like by happenstance on the subway. And so like that's what ties eventually into Jefferson, who's our convicted killer in prison. This is a terrible summary. But so like it all kicks off. And so he ends up like locking the vicar, Harry ends up locking the tutor into the cellar. And like that's the show. It's kind of like claustrophobic and terrible, dealing with like a bunch of unpleasant stuff. So then the vicar is trying to like clean all this up. So his solution is like, I'll go to my parishioner who's like an adult male, but like not doing great, clearly has some mental health stuff going on, is a clear victim of abuse. We see the abuse, the physical abuse happen, emotional abuse is certainly implied. And so it's like just an unpleasant thing, but also looking at child porn. So like he is both a perpetrator and a victim at the same time. And so the show doesn't like delve super into that. Just that like he's I don't know. I don't want to say he's just as a plot point. I'll talk more about it. But like the vicar's like, I'll just get him to say it's his. That clears my name. That clears my son's name. No problemo. Like, let's go. Very naive of how it's going to go. The parishioner, Edgar is his name, played by Mark Quartley. British actor. I don't know what else he might be in. And so Edgar's like, nah, I'm not going to say that's mine. Like, I don't know what's on that. I don't know how you got it. Like, just totally denies it. And the vicar's like floored by this. Like, you handed it to me in my office. Come on. Like, it's yours. You need to go to the police and say it's yours. Like, and Edgar's just denying it. The vicar had gone to like Edgar's house to look for him. He lives with his mother. His mother's now very suspicious of Edgar. And so Edgar's like out in public when the vicar confronts him. He's out with like his friends, and then he takes him off in private to confront him. But like, again, kind of like an unpleasant, whatever, confrontation that goes very poorly. And then Edgar, they like meet later in the church, and the vicar's like shouting at him and is like, you need to confess. And he's like using the like religious stuff to be really gross and kind of force Edgar into doing this thing. And like Edgar's not in the right here, right? Like there's not, this show doesn't have a good, the show doesn't have a hero. Um, but so it's just like very unpleasant. And then at the end of season one, Edgar ends up hanging himself, and so he leaves a note and says like the vicar's protecting someone, implying like the stuff that was on the memory stick isn't the vicar's, but he doesn't want to like stick around and deal with his mom's wrath. His mom threatens him in this process too. She's like, "What did you do? Why is the vicar around?" Blah blah blah, and like she's a yucky person. Definitely in the show, very unpleasant. And so like, yeah, the show kind of deals with a lot of heavy stuff content wise. That for me was like that stuff that I deal with, right? So those are things in the therapy room. Like I have clients who are actively suicidal. I have clients who deal with suicidal thoughts. I have clients who are trauma abuse survivors. I have clients who are in abusive relationships. Like these are all things that as a therapist, I work with. As a therapist, I'm trained, I'm licensed, right? My intro is always, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And licensure just means I had 2 years of my master's program. I had 2 more years of my post-grad work to be a licensed marriage family therapist. Otherwise, I would have been what's known as an LPC, which is licensed practitioner counselor. It just goes to say, like, I've studied, I passed a really long test to get my licensure, and I also do regular continuing education to keep my license. So like the licensure I think is really important. And one of the things that drove me crazy about the show is how poorly Harry, who's the vicar, does like anything close to something for mental health. And so it comes up that like he's trying to like do like pastoral counseling with Edgar, and like Edgar kills himself because Harry doesn't know what he's doing and like harms Edgar's mental health. And this is like a nitpicky thing. Not nitpicky, like this is a hill I've had an argument on before with people that I know. Like pastoral counseling is no good. And anyone who wants to hop on and be like, well, my pastor does a good job with it, like, nah, they're not trained to do this stuff. And where that lack of training comes in is in a crisis. Where that lack of training comes in is this type of case, right? So like a pastor, a priest, or whoever, some sort of religious leader might feel really good about like, I'm going to help this couple get ready to get married. We'll do premarital counseling. And like, fine, probably relatively harmless. Do I think you're going to get more by seeing a licensed professional? Absolutely. And I feel this way similarly. I'm not just picking on pastors and priests, although I'm going to come back to the religious trauma that this show deals with. But I feel this way about like life coaching too. Like life coaching is a little bit of the Wild West. A lot of therapists are starting to branch out into coaching because the licensure and like so many things around licensure laws between states are really restrictive. And if there's like a silver lining coming out of COVID, it was that like a lot of that stuff got relaxed, but then a lot of states have tightened it back up. And it's just like a money-making thing, right? So like if I'm licensed in Wisconsin, I can go to Minnesota and they're going to like also license me, but then I'm going to pay the Minnesota licensure fees. So it's nothing about my schooling. I don't have to retake a test. The only state that's really different, as far as I know, is California, which has just some like different rules and regulations. But like even all that, like my stuff would all transfer. So it has nothing to do with like quality of practitioner. It just comes back to money and bureaucracy, and it's a very stupid system. And so like to work around some of that system, a lot of therapists, and like myself included, I have done this. This is not an unusual thing. We'll offer like coaching or different coaching type packages for people so that they can work with them outside of the bounds of like, this is licensed therapy. I happen to have been an actual coach, right? Like I've taken teams to the NCAA. I have a winning college record, a very like surprisingly good college record. Like I've been an actual coach. And a lot of therapists don't. They're either trained just in therapy and they start saying they're coaches, or they have no therapy backgrounds and they just do coaching. And like maybe they have coaching experience, maybe not. Like, but again, it's unregulated. So like anyone can call themselves a life coach. Anyone can say they're a relationship coach. Like there is no regulating body. Not everyone can say they're a therapist. That's regulated. Like there's licensure attached to that. If somebody says they're a therapist and they're not, and something bad happens and they get sued, like they're held liable for it. So like there's accountability built into it. And the accountability is what I'm going to circle back to with like the pastoral counseling. It's like they don't have it. Like they think they do because they're like, my heavenly father thinks X, Y, and Z. My morality based on my religion is more important than your ethics. But that's false. Like it never plays out that way. Ethics are based on accountability. And so like I could lose my license, I could get sued, I have real world consequences that build the accountability around my license. That's why I keep my license. That's why I do continuing ed. If a therapist sleeps with their client, they get put on probation or lose their license. I would say that you should lose their license, and usually would. Currently in mental health, there's such a lack of therapists that I think mostly they're going on probation for stuff like that. But I mean, you can look up stuff like that. That's public record, like therapists whose license are on probation and stuff like that. That's a thing. I think everyone can look that. I know I can look that up. I don't think it's just that I have access because I'm a therapist. Anyway, Harry like drove me crazy, and I knew where the show was going. One, from like storytelling perspective, but also like knowing mental health. Like if they're going to tell Edgar as a character correctly, Edgar like 100% was going to end up killing himself. Like the way his mother abuses him, and then he's put under a high stress situation, and then Harry abuses him. Harry comes, not physically, but comes back around and is like shouting at him about repenting and confessing and like all this Catholic guilt type stuff in the church. And like it's uncomfortable to watch. Like it's gross. It was a yucky feeling for me. It was like maddening for me to be like, that's such bad therapy. Like that's why people shouldn't be able to do therapy who aren't therapists. And like very strong guttural reaction for me on that. But like again, like I think there's some accuracy in the show. There's some truth in the show. Almost every perpetrator of abuse that I've worked with, this is anecdotal. Don't take this as statistics. This is anecdotal based on my 14 years of experience. But almost every single person I have worked with, anecdotally speaking, who's been an abuser of some form or another, has also been a victim of abuse themselves. And so like it's really, it's black and white thinking. It's a bias. It's cognitive bias for us as human beings to be like, oh, I hate people who abuse other people. Sure, like abuse is bad. I can agree with that across the board. No notes on that. But it gets tricky. It's a gray area on like, oh, well, most abusers are also victims themselves. So like we want to support victims and not perpetrators, but also like what happens when there's an overlap. And like lots of people are abused and don't go on to be perpetrators. So obviously the people who are perpetrating abuse themselves are doing a bad thing. Like there are other options. They don't need to do that. It's not like a guarantee that if you are abused that you're going to abuse someone else. So like I'm not excusing it in any way, shape, or form. I'm not supporting it or saying like it's okay. I'm just saying like it's tougher to just have that black and white thinking around like, oh, well, like abusers are bad and wrong and terrible people, but also I'm going to love and support victims because there's overlap there. And so I guess as a therapist, you have to work through some of that stuff. You study that stuff. You learn about that stuff. You work on your own personal biases to be able to work with that stuff. Like I can't work with animal abuse. Like it's just a thing that I can't like wrap my head around. It's not a thing that I have any grace for. It's a thing that's come up in therapy. And when it came up in therapy, it's like, oh, I can't deal with this. So if that's the thing that comes up in therapy, I'm going to refer that out. And so one of the things that comes up with something like pastoral counseling is like, you're guaranteed to have a dual relationship. And in therapy, we work really hard to not have dual relationships. This is fun given like the current state of the Supreme Court and all the like the lack of ethics going on. Even the appearance of like a dual relationship is frowned upon in therapy. And the thing with pastoral counseling, especially the way it's set up in the show, is like Edgar and Harry have a relationship because Harry is Edgar's vicar. And so he's supposed to be doing therapy with him, but he's also like hearing confession and he's doing all these other things. So it's a dual relationship. There are multiple roles that Harry's playing in Edgar's life, and that like muddies the water, that makes it convoluted and complicated to get like good, clear, concise help. And so that's really problematic. And it becomes obviously problematic when Harry's then abusing that power later to try and get Edgar to do what he wants. And like, it's purely based out of Harry trying to get out of a jam. And like the whole show is like, not the whole show, most of the show is kind of on like wrong place at the wrong time. Like the tutor's in the wrong place at the wrong time. The kid's in the wrong, Harry's son is in the wrong place at the wrong time. There are like people who do bad things, like Edgar's mom, Edgar, Jefferson, the murderer. Jefferson has an assistant who's like show stealing. He's a very like funny character in the show, who's like a serial killer and eats people. But like in the show, we kind of see him as this like jovial fellow who has like perfect memory, and so he takes notes in his head for Jefferson. I got sidetracked there. but yeah, so like that dual relationship in pastoral counseling, like I'm your pastor, I'm your priest, I'm your spiritual advisor, I'm your religious leader, and I'm doing therapy. Like, no, nope, can't do that. Like, that's unethical. The other issue that I have with pastoral counseling that I see a lot, besides dual relationships problem, like should rule it out right away, no questions asked. Lack of training problem, should rule it out right away, no questions asked. The third problem I have with it, is like that lack of accountability. It's just one of those things where, like, again, there's no accreditation. There's no like, oh, you had a semester of counseling during a class you took, or you had like one class around mental health. Like, you're not qualified to be doing it. You don't have the tools. You haven't studied the mental health thing. Like, somebody who's like diagnosing, somebody who's working with demon possession and also trying to diagnose something like schizophrenia. Like, bro, what are you like? How are you balancing that? And I'm saying, bro, there could be female religious leaders. I was raised so conservative that wasn't a thing. Not meaning to be sexist. Um, the religion was raised in certainly was. Um, but yeah, so it's like that lack of accountability, and a lot of times they'll fall back on religion and say like, well, my religion is more moral than any ethics. But like, that's not true. Ethics are very important. Ethics relate strictly to accountability, and if we've learned anything from the child abuse scandals in the Catholic Church, the sex abuse cover up in the Southern Baptist Convention, name a religion and search abuse, and you'll find it online, because it happens in all of them, because there isn't actually accountability. The organized religious model is to move whatever person did something bad or wrong into a different environment. So like, that's what's happened in the Catholic Church for years. That's what's happened in the Southern Baptist Convention. I saw it. I was raised Lutheran. I saw it in the Lutheran Church. Like, a pastor does a bad thing, rather than like getting them out of the profession, a priest or whoever, a religious leader does a bad thing, rather than getting them out, defrocking them or taking them out of the profession, keeping them away from kids. Like, I don't know, some pretty basic responses. It's to move them to a different place, to avoid the controversy, to avoid making the church look bad. And like, but that goes back to some of the dual relationship stuff. So like, you're trying to not make the church look bad. You're not doing what's best for the person that you're doing counseling with. And like, that is what a therapist does. Like, they're doing what's best for their client, and like, there are ethics that hold them accountable for that. There's real life consequences for their behaviors that hold them accountable for that. So yeah, I have a lot of problems with the way, and like, the show, I think, portrayed it accurately. Like, it's not a problem with the show. It's that like, right, this stuff happens. Like, these are things that should not happen. These people are not qualified how to do it. The other thing that then really comes up in the show is like Harry using the religion as like a cudgel, like to batter Edgar into doing what he wants. And like, I work with religious trauma, so I think that happens no matter what. Like, I think like, if you're telling like a little kid about hell when they're 3 or 4 years old, like, that's traumatic. And there's no way anyone has been able to explain that to me in a way that's developmentally appropriate. Like, there's no way to do that to your kid. And so like, that threat, that ongoing like threat of violence, like, you're gonna burn in hell for forever. Like, that's not a way to like get someone to do something healthy. That's not a way for someone to make a healthy decision. That's fear-based. And I say this to clients all the time, but like, fear is not a good decision maker. So yeah, like, the religious trauma aspect in the show is implied. There's like actual trauma that happens. We see it on screen. We see physical abuse. We see emotional abuse on screen. But like, the religious trauma is there. Like, Edgar is wired for some of this stuff, like the power dynamic between him and his vicar, the power dynamic between a regular parishioner and a priest or a pastor. Like, it's not a level playing field. There's a clear hierarchy, and that hierarchy creates the opportunity for abuse to happen. And that's what happens over and over again in all these different religious institutions that have abuse scandals. Is there's lack of accountability, and there's a power imbalance where abuse is like, I don't want to say it's guaranteed to happen, but like, we don't have much evidence that says it's not going to happen when that's the power differential. So I just say like, the opportunity is always there. And so that's problematic for sure. And the show, I think, like, handled it well. I think the show like was very fair to religion. I think maybe even like overly kind to religion, for such like a terrible, and the show ends with the vicar, spoiler alert, getting arrested. Pretty big spoilers throughout the first synopsis that I gave. And he ends up in jail. And so for like false imprisonment and trying to keep someone in his cellar. And like, the show, there's some other twists and turns that happen in the show. The show, I thought, was like incredibly well acted. I thought the story didn't pan out a ton. The first episode really grabbed me and grabbed my attention, and I liked it a lot. And then it was kind of like, I stayed because David Tennant's fun to watch. But it's like, unpleasant. But like David Tennant's been in other stuff that's unpleasant to watch, like Broadchurch, and like you still watch it, like because the show's good, the story's good. So Inside Man, I thought the story actually ended up being a little weak, like wrong place, wrong time, and then I'm gonna lock you in the cellar. And like, good thing, like such an old house that nobody could hear it. And it was so well insulated, nobody could hear her yelling from the cellar, and you couldn't like get through the door. And like, I don't know, there's just a lot of things where it was like, sure, like had to have been like, I don't know. So I think there was some hokiness to it. It was compelling enough that I watched it all. But definitely, like, I think brought up some stuff for me where it was like, right, this is why we have trained professionals dealing with things like this. This is why I think we need to be doing more things in society at large, like having social workers or having people who are trained in mental health respond to mental health crises instead of having a cop in full uniform with a gun showing up to that stuff. Like, there are ways where people who are professionals can deal with some of these things in a way that people who aren't familiar with mental health or aren't trained in it can deal with this. So definitely like triggered a lot for me in that, where it's like, right, this is why pastors shouldn't be doing therapy. This is why pastoral counseling shouldn't even be a thing. I worked in a religious setting once, religiously affiliated, where there was someone who was licensed and let their license lapse, and they were just like, well, it's because I do pastoral counseling. I'm like, that's bad. That shouldn't have been allowed to happen. And if anyone had like understood why that was bad, I think it would have, but this person was like a director, and that's terrible. I've had a laundry list of experiences of like people being like, oh, well, because we're religious, it's fine, when they were breaking rules. And like, that's the problem with morality around religion, as opposed to like an actual code of ethics, and then like a clearly laid out way to make an ethics complaint against someone who's breaking the rules. So that's why like code of conducts are important. That's why standards of practice are important. That's why like licensing boards and continuing education and all these things are helpful, because on the off chance that a really weird situation arises, like an expert is going to stick to this is the way to handle it, instead of like flying off the handle or traumatizing somebody or abusing someone. So again, just like really important to find a professional who's qualified to work with what you're working with. Pastors, priests, religious leaders are not qualified to be doing mental health services. There's a bunch of dual relationships involved, and there's a lot of issues with stuff like that. And the show kind of laid out where it can go wrong. That absolutely wasn't the point of the show. That's just what stood out for me. So yeah, this was a kind of off the cuff review of Inside Man. Not necessarily a full on review, but like some things that stuck out to me. Also getting used to my new setup. I've just pulled up my recording again, so you can see I'm looking at it. Some of it might get cut. Who knows? Big shout out to Ken, my media person. Kenny, you're awesome. Ken does a lot of work to make my stuff look good and professional that I wouldn't otherwise do. Ken might cut that because they don't want it to be out in the world. But yeah, so thanks for stopping by, checking out my channel today. Thanks for dealing with me averting my eyes and being a little distracted as I was recording. New setup. I think hopefully we'll see how the final product turns up, but I think this worked pretty well. So as long I'm a hands-on learner, so as long as it ends up, the final product turns out good, I think we got a new system. So that's exciting. All right, everybody, thanks for stopping by. Peace.